There's a disturbing pattern unfolding right before our eyes. Walk into any coffee shop, any classroom, any office, and you'll see it. People scrolling endlessly, consuming opinion after opinion, yet terrified to form their own. We've created something unprecedented in human history. A generation with unlimited access to information, but a deep-seated fear of independent thought. The question isn't whether this is happening. The question is, how did we engineer this? How did we take beings capable of philosophy, innovation, and reason and turn them into intellectual conformists who panic at the thought of standing alone in their beliefs? Today, we're going to dissect this phenomenon. We'll explore the psychological mechanisms, the historical patterns, and most importantly, what Machiavelli understood about power and thought control that explains exactly what's happening to us right now. How power always feared independent thought. To understand how we got here, we need to look back, because this isn't new. What's happening today is simply the perfection of an ancient strategy. In 1513, Niccolò Machiavelli wrote in The Prince, "Men are so simple of mind, and so much dominated by their immediate needs, that a deceitful man will always find plenty who are ready to be deceived." Machiavelli understood something crucial about human nature and power. Those who control how people think control everything. Throughout history, every power structure has recognized this truth. The Catholic Church didn't just want religious obedience, they wanted to control the parameters of acceptable thought. When Galileo dared to think independently about the cosmos, he wasn't just challenging a scientific theory, he was threatening the entire system of intellectual control. The Church's response? Force him to recant, put him under house arrest, and send a clear message: independent thinking is dangerous. The Soviet Union perfected this with a more sophisticated approach. They didn't just punish wrong thoughts, they made people fear having thoughts at all. Through constant surveillance, public denunciations, and the creation of an atmosphere where any idea could be labeled as counter-revolutionary, they engineered self-censorship. People learned to police their own minds before the state had to. George Orwell captured this brilliantly in 1984 with the concept of thought crime. The ultimate control isn't forcing people to think what you want. It's making them afraid to think at all. But here's what's fascinating and terrifying about our current moment. We've achieved the same result without an authoritarian government forcing it upon us. We've done it voluntarily. We've engineered our own intellectual prison, and most people don't even realize they're trapped inside it. The neurological prison, how our brains became wired for conformity. Let's talk about what's actually happening inside your brain when you encounter a new idea that challenges your worldview. When you're exposed to information that contradicts your existing beliefs, your amygdala, the brain's fear center, lights up. Neurologically, your brain treats conflicting ideas the same way it treats physical threats. This is called cognitive dissonance, and it's deeply uncomfortable. Your brain will do almost anything to avoid this feeling. Here's where it gets interesting. Social psychologist Solomon Asch demonstrated this in his famous conformity experiments in the 1950s. He showed that when people were placed in groups where everyone else gave an obviously wrong answer, 75% of participants conformed at least once, even when they could clearly see the correct answer with their own eyes. Think about that. 3/4 of people will deny what they can see with their own eyes to avoid the social discomfort of disagreement. Now, take that neurological tendency toward conformity and amplify it through social media. Every platform is designed around one metric: engagement. And what drives engagement? Tribal belonging. You don't just hold opinions anymore, you broadcast them, and your social standing depends on holding the right ones. The result is what psychologists call pluralistic ignorance. This is when everyone privately has doubts, but publicly pretends to agree because they assume everyone else truly believes. Nobody wants to be the first to break ranks, so ideas that most people privately question go unchallenged because everyone is terrified of social isolation. Machiavelli would have understood this perfectly. In the Discourses, he wrote, "For the great majority of mankind are satisfied with appearances, as though they were realities, and are often more influenced by the things that seem than by those that are." We're not just afraid of thinking differently, we're afraid of appearing to think differently. And that's far more powerful. The algorithm that replaced your mind. Let me ask you something uncomfortable. When was the last time you changed your mind about something important? If you can't remember, there's a reason. The information ecosystem we inhabit has been precisely engineered to prevent exactly that from happening. Here's how it works. Every social media platform uses recommendation algorithms that track your behavior. What you click, what you watch, what you share, how long you linger on a post. These algorithms then serve you more of what you've already engaged with. The goal isn't to challenge you, it's to keep you engaged. And what keeps people engaged? Content that confirms what they already believe. This creates what researcher Eli Pariser calls filter bubbles. You exist in an information environment that's been custom-tailored to your existing worldview. You rarely encounter strong arguments against your positions. When you do, they're usually presented in the weakest, most strawman form possible, designed to make you feel intellectually superior for dismissing them. Over time, something insidious happens. You stop recognizing that you're in a bubble. The algorithm has been so effective at filtering out dissenting views that you begin to believe everyone reasonable thinks like you do. Anyone who disagrees must be stupid, evil, or brainwashed. This is the death of critical thinking. Not because people lack the capacity for it, but because they've been systematically trained out of it. The philosopher John Stuart Mill warned about this in On Liberty. He who knows only his own side of the case knows little of that. Mill understood that genuine understanding requires exposure to the strongest versions of opposing arguments. Not the weakest, but our information environment does the opposite. It gives us weak opponents to defeat and strong allies to cheer for. We feel intellectually accomplished while our actual thinking atrophies. Machiavelli observed in The Prince, "Everyone sees what you appear to be. Few experience what you really are." Today, everyone sees the appearance of independent thought, scrolling through articles, consuming content, forming opinions. But few experience the reality. Genuine intellectual inquiry requires discomfort, requires encountering ideas that make you question yourself, requires the courage to think in solitude rather than in tribal safety. The social cost of independent thought. Here's the mechanism that completes the prison: social punishment for intellectual deviance. We've created a culture where the fastest way to destroy someone socially is to accuse them of thinking the wrong thoughts, not of being wrong through careful analysis, simply of holding ideas outside the acceptable range. Cancel culture, whatever you think of specific instances, operates on a simple principle: make the social cost of dissent so high that people self-censor before they even speak, and more importantly, before they even allow themselves to think. This is where it gets truly Machiavellian. The most effective control isn't external punishment. It's getting people to internalize the rules and punish themselves. Psychologists call this the panopticon effect, based on Jeremy Bentham's prison design. When people believe they're always being watched, they modify their behavior even when no one is actually observing them. Social media has created a digital panopticon where everyone is potentially watching, recording, and ready to judge. The result? People have learned to monitor their own thoughts. Before you even finish forming an idea, you're running it through multiple filters. Will this offend someone? Does this align with my group? Could this be used against me? Is this what I'm supposed to think? This is what Orwell meant by thought crime. Not that the government arrests you for thinking, but that you've learned to arrest yourself. Machiavelli understood power dynamics intimately. He wrote, "The promise given was a necessity of the past. The word broken is a necessity of the present." Apply this to intellectual conformity. The freedom to think was necessary to build modern society. The punishment for thinking independently is necessary to maintain current power structures. The illusion of rebellion. Here's what's particularly clever about the current system. It gives people the feeling of rebellion while keeping them perfectly controlled. Think about how many movements today position themselves as revolutionary, as speaking truth to power, as thinking differently. Yet, if you examine their actual ideas, they're perfectly aligned with major institutions, corporations, and cultural authorities. This is what Herbert Marcuse called repressive tolerance. The system allows and even encourages certain forms of dissent because that dissent ultimately reinforces the system rather than challenging it. Real independent thought doesn't feel like joining a movement. It feels like isolation. It feels like everyone is angry at you from all sides. It feels like you're wrong, even when you might be right, because social consensus is so powerful. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus said, "If you wish to be a writer, write. If you wish to be a philosopher, philosophize. But be prepared to be laughed at. Today, we've engineered a generation that cannot bear to be laughed at, that cannot tolerate social disapproval, that needs constant validation from their tribe. This is why independent thought has died. Not because people can't think, but because they can't bear the social consequences of thinking differently. How to break free. Rebuilding your capacity for independent thought. So, what do we do about this? How do we escape this engineered prison of conformity? First, recognize the discomfort. When you encounter an idea that makes you immediately angry or defensive, that's a signal. Your brain is trying to protect you from cognitive dissonance. Instead of fleeing that discomfort, lean into it. Ask yourself, why does this bother me so much? What am I afraid of discovering? Second, practice intellectual solitude. Spend time thinking without immediately checking what others think. Form your opinion before you poll your tribe. Write down your thoughts before you Google the acceptable position. This is how you rebuild the atrophied muscle of independent reasoning. Third, actively seek out the strongest arguments against your positions. Not straw man versions. Not weak opponents. Find the smartest people who disagree with you and genuinely try to understand their reasoning. Mill was right. If you only know your own side, you don't really understand your own position. Fourth, accept social discomfort as the price of intellectual integrity. Machiavelli wrote, "It is better to be feared than loved, if you cannot be both." Apply this to ideas. It is better to be intellectually honest than socially approved, if you cannot be both. Fifth, build relationships based on intellectual honesty rather than tribal agreement. Find people who will challenge your ideas without attacking your character. These are rare but invaluable. Socrates was executed for encouraging independent thought. Galileo was imprisoned for it. Throughout history, those who thought independently paid a price. The question is, are you willing to pay the much smaller price of social discomfort to reclaim your own mind? The stakes. What we lose when thinking dies. Let me be clear about what's at stake here. This isn't just about abstract philosophy or individual psychology. When independent thought dies, civilization itself begins to crumble. Every major advancement in human history came from someone thinking differently. Democracy, science, human rights, technological innovation, all of it emerged because someone was willing to challenge the consensus. When we engineer a generation that fears thinking, we engineer stagnation. We create a society where problems can't be solved because no one is allowed to think clearly about them. We create a world where tribal loyalty trumps truth, where feelings override facts, where conformity is valued over creativity. Machiavelli wrote The Prince as a handbook for power, but he also understood that societies that cannot think clearly cannot survive. In the discourses, he observed that republics succeed or fail based on the virtue of their citizens. And the foundation of that virtue? The capacity for independent judgment. We stand at a crossroads. We can continue down the path of engineered conformity, where thinking is replaced by tribal signaling, where algorithms replace judgment, where social approval matters more than truth. Or we can reclaim the difficult, uncomfortable, often lonely practice of thinking for ourselves. The choice, as always, is yours. But make no mistake, choosing not to decide is still a choice. And the default path leads to intellectual slavery. As Machiavelli knew, the most dangerous prison is the one you don't realize you're in. The most effective control is the control that feels like freedom. The question isn't whether you're trapped. The question is whether you have the courage to escape.